4 aircraft, 7 bombs, one night. And in that span of darkness, while most of the world was asleep, the United States may have torn apart 4 decades of Iranian military investment, not slowly, not symbolically, in one tightly coordinated strike aimed at the very core of Iran's underground missile empire. This is not being framed as speculation. Satellite imagery has pointed to it, CENTCOM data has reinforced it, and the seismic activity recorded across the region tells a story Tehran cannot fully bury, no matter how hard it tries. If you have been following this war since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, then you already understand that moments like this are never just about the blast itself. They are about what the blast reveals. And what this one may reveal is staggering, that in a single night, with 4 aircraft and 7 bombs, the architecture of Iran's missile power may have been broken at its core. Today we are going deep into the mountains of Yaz and Isfahan, deep into the strategic logic of what just happened, and deep into what it means for every major military power on the planet that is watching this unfold in real time. If you're not yet subscribed to, take 5 seconds right now, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what we're about to walk you through is one of the most consequential military operations of the 21st century. And you'll want to be here when we cover what comes next. Let's begin. To understand the full weight of what happened on the night of March 27, 2026, you have to understand the doctrine that Iran has been building for 40 years. Iran doesn't have a world-class air force. It can't project naval power across oceans. What it had, what it spent billions of dollars, decades of engineering, and the forced labor of thousands of workers to build, was something else entirely. A subterranean missile empire, a network of tunnel cities bored deep into mountains across Thran, Isfahan, and Yaz provinces, reinforced, hardened, designed to survive anything a conventional air force could throw at it. The logic was simple, and for a long time, it worked. You can bomb the surface, but you can't reach us down here. And even if you try, we'll repair whatever you damage and rebuild within weeks. That doctrine had one fatal assumption built into its foundation. It assumed the enemy would play by the old rules. On the night of March 27th, the United States stopped playing by the old rules entirely. According to reports and satellite imagery that have since been reviewed by multiple independent analysts, 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri under the cover of darkness. Each aircraft carried one of the most destructive conventional weapons ever built, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb engineered specifically to penetrate tens of meters of reinforced concrete or solid rock before detonating. As reported by Army Recognition, the GBU-57 is the primary weapon for targeting underground nuclear sites and deeply buried fortified facilities, the crown jewel of America's bunker-busting arsenal. The B-2 is uniquely suited for this mission. Its unrefueled range exceeds 6,000 nautical miles, and with aerial refueling, it can sustain missions lasting more than 30 hours. Its flying wing stealth design allows it to penetrate even the most advanced air defense networks without effective detection. Iran never saw them coming. The targets that night were not random. They were chosen with surgical precision, the product of months of satellite surveillance and signals intelligence work conducted by both U.S. and Israeli intelligence agencies. 4 targets, 4 links, in a single production chain. And the plan was to break all 4 simultaneously in one night so that no single broken link could be compensated for by the others. Here's where it gets devastating. The first target was a deep underground facility in the Thran region, the final assembly line for Iran's ballistic missile bodies, the last stop in the serial production of Shahab and Sajal variants. Reports indicate that the GBU-57 was released from high altitude, penetrated the mountain's rocky structure and multiple layers of reinforced concrete, and detonated at a depth of approximately 50 meters. The seismic wave that followed was documented. The blast pressure, according to reporting reviewed by, collapsed the supporting infrastructure, sealed ventilation shafts, disabled the electrical system, and forced personnel inside to evacuate. Infrastructure worth billions of dollars reduced to rubble from a single weapon. But a missile body without an engine is useless, which is exactly why the second target mattered just as much. The second strike reached Isfahan province, home to one of Iran's most critical rocket engine test complexes. This was not a storage site. This was where the propulsion systems for Iran's Shahab variants were developed, tested, and calibrated. The heart of the ballistic missile program's propulsion chain beat here. According to reports, the GBU-57's detonation at a depth of roughly 150 feet completely destroyed the precision equipment housed in the test chambers. Fires disabled the ventilation system. Sensitive calibration devices, the kind that take years to replace, were damaged beyond recovery. Independent satellite data reviewed separately from Iranian state claims assesses the damage as permanent. The production chain was severed at this point. That's 2 of 4 links broken. The third strike reached what analysts are calling the deepest point of the entire operation, an underground facility in the Yaz region processing cruise missile components. At a reported penetration depth of 200 feet, this was the deepest GBU-57 strike of the night. Reports indicate that a thermobaric effect was triggered, igniting the facility's oxygen system and causing a chain reaction that destroyed both the production area and the storage section. The significance of this target extends beyond Iran's ballistic capabilities. This facility is assessed to have been the production source for munitions supplied to Hezbollah and the Houthis, the backbone of Iran's asymmetric cruise missile capability, the weapons that have been destabilizing the Red Sea and Lebanon for years. That supply chain appears to have been severed at its source. And then there was the fourth target, perhaps the most strategically urgent of them all. On the coast, near the Strait of Hormuz, sat a large underground storage depot, housing a significant concentration of anti-ship ballistic missiles. This was not just a military target, this was a geopolitical weapon. The strait handles approximately 20% of global oil trade. Iran's ability to threaten tankers and commercial vessels passing through it with these missiles was, for decades, its single most powerful asymmetric trump card. The threat to close Hormuz, or to make it too dangerous to use, gave Thrawn leverage over the global economy that far exceeded its conventional military power. According to reports, the GBU-57 strike on this depot triggered secondary detonations, a chain reaction of fires and explosions caused by the munitions destroying themselves in sequence. The scale of destruction suggests that a large portion, potentially the majority, of the anti-ship stockpile housed there was lost in those explosions. As White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt noted in her official statement, President Trump had succeeded in getting the Strait of Hormuz reopened, a direct consequence of destroying the physical infrastructure that made its closure credible. 4 links, 4 simultaneous strikes, 1 night. Final missile assembly in Thran, gone. Engine production in Isfahan, gone. Cruise missile component processing in Yaz, gone. The Hormuz anti-ship depot, gone. In military production, the process of assembling components relies on precise timing. Even the failure of a single link halts the entire assembly line. Operation Epic Fury shattered 3 critical production links simultaneously while neutralizing the single greatest maritime threat Iran possessed. This is what CENTCOM's own data reflects. As reported by U.S. Admiral Brad Cooper, Iran's ballistic missile launch rate fell 90% from day 1 of the war, and drone launch rates dropped 83%. Defense analyst A.J. Jaff, reviewing the same data independently, assessed the missile decline at 92%, from roughly 480 launches per day to approximately 40. That is strategic strangulation in statistical form. Now, if you've been watching for any length of time, you know we never stop at the headline number. Let's talk about what made this possible. Because the operation itself represents a logistics and intelligence achievement that rivals the physical destruction it caused. The B-2 bombers that executed these strikes flew from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. That is not a short trip. According to Military Times, the B-2s flew 3 6-hour non-stop missions sustained entirely by aerial refueling bridges provided by KC-135 Stratotanker and KC-46 Pegasus aircraft operating across the ocean. U.S. Air Force reporting confirmed that CENTCOM publicly released imagery of KC-135 and KC-46 aircraft refueling bomber formations mid-flight as recently as April 2, 2026. This sustained logistical chain, invisible to anyone on the ground, is what makes America's power projection unique in the world. Very few nations possess both the aircraft and the refueling infrastructure to conduct this kind of mission from their home soil. And it wasn't just the B-2S. As reported by Air and Space Forces magazine, the broader campaign involves approximately 24 bomber aircraft, supplementing more than 200 American fighter jets participating in Operation Epic Fury. B-52 Stratofortress bombers, once the workhorses of long-range strategic bombing, recently conducted their first overland missions inside Iran, a development that Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane described on March 30th, noting that the U.S. was, in his words, switching towards more and more dynamic targets, servicing mobile targets around the battle space. The B-52's overland flights over Iran signal something important. Iranian air defenses have been sufficiently degraded that the United States no longer needs to rely exclusively on standoff weapons or stealth penetrators. The skies over Iran are increasingly controlled by coalition forces. By April 1st, CENTCOM reported that U.S. forces had struck over 13,000 sites across the country. By the 6-week mark, over 13,000 confirmed strikes. And yet, the most consequential were those 4 GBU-57 drops on a single night. Before we go further, if this analysis is giving you clarity on a conflict that too many channels are covering with heat and noise rather than depth, please take a moment to subscribe and share this video. We do this work because the details matter. And in this conflict, the details are everything. Now, let's talk about what happened at sea. Because the destruction of the Hormuz depot was not the only blow to Iran's maritime power. The IRGC, Navy's fast attack fleet, the coastal warfare capability that Iran had spent years building as an asymmetric counter to U.S. naval dominance in the Gulf, was systematically targeted on the same night. Precision-guided munitions struck fast attack boats, patrol vessels, and coastal defense assets in coordinated sequential strikes. According to CENTCOM data, over 150 Iranian ships or boats were damaged or destroyed during the conflict, a figure that indicates Iran's coastal defense capabilities have been largely neutralized. The USS Tripoli amphibious assault ship, carrying 3,500 Marines, arrived in the area in the days following these strikes and positioned itself ready for coastal operations. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. was not simply degrading Iran's ability to launch missiles, it was removing Iran's ability to contest the maritime environment at all. The sinking of fast attack craft and the destruction of patrol vessels doesn't just reduce naval firepower, it eliminates Iran's ability to project presence along its own coastline. The maneuvering space available to IRGC naval forces has contracted dramatically. Ships that venture from port now do so under constant threat from coalition air power. That confinement is a form of strategic paralysis, and it is working. Here's where the operation gets even more surgical, and frankly more fascinating from a military strategy perspective. Destruction alone was never the full objective. You can destroy a facility, but unless you also destroy the enemy's ability to repair it, they will simply rebuild. Iran's underground doctrine was partially built on this assumption. Even if you're hit, you can fix it. The regime had repaired facilities after previous strikes. They had brought in construction equipment, cleared debris, reopened roads, and resumed operations. It was part of the resilience logic baked into the underground empire. Operation Epic Fury targeted that assumption directly. The Dezful missile base in Khuzestan province, which had already collapsed in previous attacks earlier in the campaign, became a case study in what CENTCOM calls denial of reconstitution. While Iranian repair crews were clearing debris and attempting to reopen access roads, bulldozers and heavy machinery were targeted by precision drone strikes. Vehicles carrying construction equipment were struck, transportation routes were blocked. The logistics chain required to rebuild was methodically severed. This is not simply a military tactic. It is a profound psychological operation directed at Iran's entire defense establishment. Striking a base causes damage. Targeting the teams and vehicles sent to repair it sends a different message entirely. There is no recovery. There is no rebuild. Every attempt to reconstitute will be met with another strike. The regime's promise that the underground empire could survive and regenerate has been directly refuted, not by a single dramatic moment, but by the relentless elimination of every mechanism Iran might use to restore it. The psychological dimension of this extends far beyond military planners. For decades, The Iranian state sold its people on a specific narrative. The tunnels beneath the mountains are impenetrable. The underground cities are proof of the regime's invincibility. These are the physical embodiment of the Islamic Republic's claim that it cannot be broken by external force. That narrative had extraordinary power, both as a deterrent and as domestic propaganda. The GBU-57 shattered that narrative in a matter of seconds. When seismic shock waves from underground explosions ripple through populated areas, when the mountains that people were told would protect them transform into the sites of catastrophic destruction, something breaks in the collective perception of both the civilian population and the Revolutionary Guard. The psychological impact of seeing impenetrable shelters breached, of knowing that command meetings held in deep bunkers are no longer safe, of watching the regime's myth of invincibility collapse in real time, is a dimension of modern air power that goes beyond damage assessments and sortie counts. What is gone is not just the ammunition depots. What is gone is the promise of state security itself. Now, let's address the nuclear dimension, because this is where the operation's strategic message extends to audiences far beyond Tehran. Operation Epic Fury did not simply target missiles. It targeted the nuclear fuel cycle at 3 distinct points. As reported by multiple outlets and confirmed by CENTCOM briefings, strikes severed raw material processing in Yazd, specifically targeting yellow cake production lines, the earliest stage of the nuclear fuel cycle. Separately, the support infrastructure of the heavy water reactor area was struck, cutting off the potential for plutonium production. And fuel rod storage areas around the Bushehr plant were targeted, with Rosatom subsequently issuing a security alert and evacuating a significant portion of its personnel. Here is the critical detail, and it is one that distinguishes this operation from past conflicts. No environmental disaster was caused, the reactor cores were protected, no radiation leaks were reported. CENTCOM coordinated with the IAEA and brought the nuclear safety dimension explicitly to the international stage. The message that the United States was sending was precise and calculated. We can reach your nuclear program. We can sever it at multiple points simultaneously. We can do it without triggering the environmental catastrophe that would turn the global community against us. This is not a message for Iran alone. It is a demonstration directed at every nation on the nuclear threshold, a sophisticated proof of concept that surgical nuclear containment is operationally achievable. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on March 2nd that the U.S. is conducting operations to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and its navy, describing these as, in his words, the clear objective of this mission. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, speaking on March 4th, framed the mandate even more bluntly. The mission was to obliterate Iran's missiles and drones and the facilities that produce them, annihilate the navy, sever support for proxy networks, and ensure Iran will never possess a nuclear bomb. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane added on the same day that the operation was designed to dismantle Iran's ability to project power outside its borders both today and in the future. These are not the words of officials conducting a limited punitive strike. This is the language of a campaign designed to permanently alter the military balance, and the timeline was always compressed by design. The Trump administration's strategic calculus, visible in public statements and subsequent diplomatic moves, pointed toward a 4 to 6 week campaign of intensified operations, followed by forcing Iran to the negotiating table from a position of profound weakness. The goal was never to topple the regime by force. The goal was to reduce its military capabilities to a point where returning to negotiations became the only viable option. Here's where the story becomes even more layered. Because on April 8, 2026, as published in this analysis, that calculus appears to have produced results. According to reporting from multiple news sources today, the United States and Iran have agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, with negotiations set to begin in Islamabad. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt described the ceasefire as a victory achieved through military strength and strategic pressure. She noted that Operation Epic Fury had been envisioned as a 4 to 6 week campaign and achieved its key military objectives in 38 days. Her exact framing: the success of our military created maximum leverage, allowing President Trump and the team to engage in tough negotiations that have now created an opening for a diplomatic solution and long-term peace. Iran, for its part, is publicly claiming victory. Iran's Supreme National Security Council declared that the opposing side had suffered what it described as a historic defeat in an illegal war. The council insisted Iran had secured a major strategic victory and compelled the United States to accept conditions for ending the conflict. Iran has presented a 1-0-point demand framework, including guarantees of no further U.S. attacks, recognition of Iran's right to nuclear enrichment, lifting of all primary sanctions, withdrawal of U.S. military forces from the region, and war reparations. This is the classic asymmetric communications gap in post-conflict diplomacy. Both sides claim victory. Both sides frame the outcome for their domestic audiences. But the ground truth, the physical reality assessed by independent satellite data, CENTCOM reports, and third-party military analysts, tells a specific story about what Iran's missile infrastructure looks like today compared to what it looked like on February 27th. According to analysis by the Institute for the Study of War, Iran entered Operation Epic Fury, possessing what was assessed to be the largest and most diverse ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East, a force 3 decades in the making, built on North Korean technology transfers, domestic engineering programs, and sustained investment in the hardened underground infrastructure we have been describing. That arsenal has been systematically degraded. The production chain that would allow it to be reconstituted has been severed at multiple points. The repair capacity has been targeted. The naval asymmetric deterrent has been neutralized. Negotiations in Islamabad will now begin in the shadow of these facts. But here is the broader strategic implication that every military planner and every defense ministry in the world is now processing. And this is where the impact of Operation Epic Fury extends far beyond the Iran file. For decades, the calculus of underground fortification was considered settled. Deep tunnels beneath mountains were assumed to provide a measure of invulnerability that no conventional air campaign could fully overcome. North Korea's tunnel networks, China's Yulon submarine base, Russia's Yamato strategic bunker complex, these were treated as strategic insurance policies, the ultimate hedge against conventional military pressure. What 4 B-2 aircraft demonstrated in a single night is that this calculus may need to be fundamentally reconsidered. Not because the GBU-57 can reach the deepest tunnels, it cannot, but because the coalition did not attempt to reach the deepest tunnels. It targeted the production facilities, the assembly lines, the storage areas, and the supply infrastructure that make those tunnels operationally meaningful. The tunnel itself is irrelevant if everything that goes into it and comes out of it has been destroyed. The depth and the distance are no longer a shield when the intelligence picture can pinpoint coordinates at millimeter precision through months of satellite surveillance, and when the strike package can deliver simultaneous hits across an entire production chain in a matter of hours. This message is being received in Beijing, in Pyongyang, in Moscow, not just as a demonstration of U.S. air power, but as a demonstration that a doctrine of strategic concealment has a counter-doctrine that is now operationally proven. As Mark Gunzinger, former B-52 pilot and director of Future Concepts and Capability Assessments at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, noted in recent analysis, what the bomber fleet brings to operations like this is larger payloads, longer duration missions, and the ability to maintain a presence in the weapons engagement zone for extended periods, long enough to respond to dynamic targets as they are located. So, that persistence, combined with the precision of modern intelligence collection and the penetrating capability of the GBU-57, creates an operational profile that hardened underground infrastructure was not designed to survive. The Strait of Hormuz has been reopened. Iran's naval power has been largely neutralized. The missile production chain has been severed at 4 simultaneous points. The nuclear fuel cycle has been interrupted at 3 stages. Repair capacity has been targeted and degraded. And a 2-week ceasefire is now in effect, with negotiations beginning in Islamabad. Whether that ceasefire holds, and whether the negotiations in Islamabad produce a lasting framework, or simply a pause before the next phase of this conflict, we do not yet know. Iran's 1-0-point demand list is, in the assessment of most Western analysts, a diplomatic opening position rather than a realistic expectation. The gap between what Tehran is publicly demanding and what Washington is publicly willing to concede is vast. The question is whether the reality on the ground, the collapsed production facilities, The neutralized navy, the severed nuclear cycle, is enough to move both sides toward a framework that neither will celebrate but both can accept. We will be watching Islamabad closely. We will be watching the satellite imagery. We will be watching CENTCOM briefings. And we will be watching what happens when the 2-week ceasefire window expires, because the Trump administration has been explicit. The 4 to 6 week timeline was always a threshold, not a ceiling. The option of serious escalation remains on the table should negotiations fail. And the aircraft that flew from Missouri on the night of March 27th are still operational, still ready, and still perfectly capable of flying again. What Operation Epic Fury has proven, beyond the specific damage assessments, beyond the specific targets, beyond the specific negotiations now underway, is that the era of impunity for hardened underground military infrastructure may be drawing to a close. The weapons exist, the intelligence architecture exists, the logistics chain exists, the political will has been demonstrated, and the combination of all four, directed against the right targets in the right sequence, can strategically cripple a nation's military production capacity in a matter of hours. That is the message that resonates from the mountains of Yazd to the submarine caves of Yulan. That is the operational lesson that defense planners in a dozen capitals are absorbing right now. And that is why what happened on one night in late March 2026 may ultimately reshape the military doctrines of the next decade. We will of course keep you updated as the Islamabad negotiations develop, as new satellite assessments emerge, and as the next phase of this story unfolds. This is where we stay until we understand what actually happened, not just what was reported. If this analysis gave you something no other channel did today, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who deserves the full picture. We'll see you in the next.